The hallways of Westfield Music Academy grew quiet as evening settled in. Most students had gone home, leaving behind the faint echo of practice sessions that had filled the building all day. The polished floors reflected the dimmed lights as Elena Moreno pushed her cleaning cart down the corridor, her footsteps barely making a sound. Elena was easy to overlook. At 42, her dark hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and her blue uniform blended into the background of the prestigious academy. Her hands, though clean, showed signs of hard work, slightly rough from years of handling cleaning supplies and scrubbing surfaces. She moved with purpose but kept her eyes down, especially when passing the few remaining students or faculty members. Tonight was like any other night. Elena started her shift by emptying trash cans in the administration offices, then worked her way toward the practice rooms. She could hear someone playing the cello in room 103, a back suite that made her pause for just a moment before continuing her work. "Excuse me, could you come back later? I'm preparing for an audition," said a young man who barely looked up from his sheet music when Elena quietly opened the door. "Of course. Sorry to disturb you," she replied with a slight accent, closing the door gently. This was nothing new. After 3 years of working at the academy, Elena had grown accustomed to being treated like she was invisible. The students saw the uniform, not the person. The teachers barely acknowledged her presence. That was fine with Elena. She preferred to stay unnoticed. She continued down the hall, finding most practice rooms empty and ready to be cleaned. In room 108, someone had left a candy wrapper on the floor and pencil marks on the music stand. Elena cleaned them without complaint, humming softly to herself as she worked. When she reached the last practice room, she found it empty but with the lights still on. A student had left in a hurry sheet music scattered across the stand. As Elena organized the pages, her eyes caught the title, Mendelssohn's Violin Concerto in E minor. Her fingers trembled slightly as she touched the notes on the page. Looking around to make sure no one was watching, Elena placed her cleaning cloth on the nearby chair. She lifted her hand and positioned her fingers in the air, as if holding an invisible violin. Her left hand moved along an imaginary fingerboard while her right arm drew an unseen bow. For just a minute, Elena was somewhere else, on a different stage, in a different life. The music played in her head so clearly she could almost hear it filling the small room. Her body swayed slightly with the melody, eyes closed, lost in the moment. "What are you doing?" The sharp voice startled Elena. She dropped her hands immediately and grabbed her cleaning cloth, face flushing with embarrassment. Professor Walsh stood in the doorway, eyebrows raised. "I'm sorry. I was just cleaning," Elena mumbled, quickly wiping down the already clean piano bench. The professor stared at her curiously. "You were playing something in the air." Elena shook her head. "No, ma'am. Just stretching my arms. Long day." Professor Walsh didn't look convinced but didn't press further. "Well, I need to lock up this wing in 10 minutes, she said before walking away. Elena's heart was still racing as she finished cleaning the room. She had been careless. It was dangerous to let those old memories surface, especially here where they could only bring pain and mockery. Back in the janitor's closet, Elena stored her supplies and changed out of her work shoes. She checked the time, 9:45 p.m. If she hurried, she could catch the 10:00 bus and be home by 10:30. Her small apartment wasn't much, but it was clean and quiet. As Elena signed out at the security desk, she heard beautiful violin music coming from the main concert hall. Through the partially open door, she could see a young woman practicing on stage, her teacher watching critically from the front row. The piece was familiar. The same Mendelssohn concerto Elena had been thinking about earlier. Without meaning to, Elena stopped to listen, her hand resting on the doorframe. The student was talented but struggling with a difficult passage. Elena's fingers twitched involuntarily, knowing exactly how those notes should feel under the fingertips. "You need something?" the security guard asked. Elena shook her head and walked away. Some dreams were better left buried. Little did she know that in a few days' time, her carefully hidden past would be exposed in the most unexpected way. Elena's tiny apartment was quiet except for the ticking of an old clock. After a quick dinner of leftover soup, she pulled out a worn photo album from beneath her bed. She rarely allowed herself this indulgence, but something about hearing that Mendelssohn piece had stirred memories she couldn't ignore tonight. The album's first pages showed a younger Elena, her hair long and flowing, standing proudly with a violin. In one photo, she wore a formal black dress on a brightly lit stage. Her smile was confident, her posture perfect. Next to her stood an older man with the same warm eyes, her father George. 20 years, Elena whispered to herself. It had been that long since she truly played. Her fingers traced the edges of the photographs. Back then, life had been so different. At just 22, she had been one of the most promising students at the National Conservatory in her home country. Music critics had written about her extraordinary sensitivity and technical brilliance. Her violin teacher had told her parents she could have an international career. Elena stood up and walked to her closet. Behind winter coats and shoeboxes sat a long, slender case covered in dust. She pulled it out carefully and placed it on her bed. For several minutes, she just stared at it, hesitating. Finally, she undid the latches. Inside, wrapped in faded blue velvet cloth, was her violin. Unlike the gleaming instruments at the academy, this one showed its age. The wood had darkened over time, and tiny scratches marked its surface. But Elena had always thought these imperfections made it beautiful, like it had lived a full life. She didn't take it out of the case. She never did anymore. It was enough to look. 20 years ago, when political unrest spread through her country, everything changed overnight. Her father, a university professor who had spoken out against the government, was arrested. The family received threats. Elena's mother made the difficult decision to flee with her 2 children. They left with only what they could carry. Elena's choice to bring her violin meant leaving behind books, clothes, and keepsakes. Her mother had questioned this decision. They needed practical things. But Elena couldn't bear to part with it. In America, survival came first. Elena's conservatory credits weren't recognized here. Her mother fell ill, medical bills piled up, and Elena's younger brother needed school supplies. Music became a luxury they couldn't afford. At first, Elena tried to keep playing. She practiced late at night in their small apartment, using a mute to dampen the sound. She inquired about scholarships at local music schools, but was told she was too old for their programs. She applied for orchestra auditions, but without recent training or connections, doors remained closed. One rejection letter had been particularly painful. While you clearly have received training, your technique shows signs of rustiness and your repertoire knowledge is outdated, it read. Elena had cried all night, then packed away her violin the next morning. She took a job cleaning houses, then offices, and finally, in a twist of irony, the Westfield Music Academy. The very place that could have been her professional home became instead the place where she emptied trash cans and wiped fingerprints from practice room mirrors. Elena closed the violin case without touching the instrument. Some wounds were still too fresh, even after 20 years. She returned it to its hiding place in the closet and put the photo album away. As she prepared for bed, her phone rang. It was Mrs. Chen from next door, asking if Elena could watch her son tomorrow evening during a doctor's appointment. Elena agreed immediately. The extra money would help with this month's electricity bill. That was her life now, practical concerns, helping neighbors, working hard. Music had become a ghost that occasionally haunted her, nothing more. And yet, as she drifted off to sleep, the Mendelssohn concerto played in her mind, her fingers unconsciously moving against the bedsheets as if finding their place on invisible strings. Some parts of ourselves can never truly be silenced, no matter how hard we try to forget them. The annual faculty showcase at Westfield Music Academy was a grand affair. Posters had been up for weeks, and Elena had spent extra time polishing the floors and dusting the crystal chandeliers in the main concert hall. Tonight, she worked quickly, knowing she needed to be invisible before guests arrived. "Make sure the bathrooms are spotless," said her supervisor, handing her additional cleaning supplies. "Important donors will be here tonight." Elena nodded and hurried to finish her tasks. She wasn't supposed to be working during the event, but another janitor had called in sick. The extra hours meant extra pay, so she had agreed to stay. By 6 o'clock, people in elegant clothes began arriving. Elena kept to the shadows, emptying trash bins and wiping down bathroom counters. The music from the hall drifted through the corridors, piano, then flute, then a string quartet. Each performance was met with enthusiastic applause. At the intermission, guests spilled into the lobby for champagne and small talk. Elena moved carefully between them, picking up discarded programs and napkins. No one noticed her, their eyes sliding past her uniform as if she weren't there. After intermission, Elena slipped backstage to clean the green room where performers waited before going on stage. She thought it would be empty during the second half, but a young woman sat nervously in the corner, clutching a violin case. "I'm sorry to disturb you," Elena said, backing toward the door. "It's fine," the young woman replied. "I'm just waiting. I'm a student assistant tonight." She opened her violin case, revealing a beautiful instrument with a rich, honey-colored finish. Elena couldn't help but stare. "That's a lovely violin." "Thank you. It's my teacher's. Mine isn't good enough for this event, so he's letting me use his for tonight." "May I?" Elena hesitated. "May I look closer?" The student seemed surprised but nodded. Elena approached carefully, as if the violin might vanish if she moved too quickly. "It's a Guardsman copy," the student explained. "Professor Harmon collects valuable instruments." Elena's fingers hovered over the violin but didn't touch it. She recognized the craftsmanship, the perfect curves, the way the light caught the varnish. For a moment, she forgot herself. "You play?" the student asked. Before Elena could answer, the door swung open. Professor Richard Harmon strode in, his tall figure commanding the small space. With his silver hair and tailored suit, he looked every bit the distinguished department head. "Lily, you're needed." He stopped abruptly, seeing Elena so close to the violin. "What are you doing?" "Nothing, sir," Elena said, stepping back quickly. "Just cleaning." Professor Harmon's eyes narrowed. "Were you touching that instrument?" "No, sir. I was just looking." "She wasn't doing anything wrong," the student, Lily, said. But Professor Harmon wasn't listening. A slow, unpleasant smile spread across his face. "Do you like violins?" he asked Elena. Something in his tone made Elena uneasy. "They're beautiful instruments," she answered cautiously. "Played a lot, do you?" His voice dripped with mockery. "No, sir." "But you'd like to." He picked up the violin and held it out to her. Elena shook her head and backed away. "I need to finish my work." By now, several other faculty members had gathered at the door, curious about the commotion. Professor Harmon seemed to enjoy the growing audience. "Come now," he insisted, his voice louder. "Our cleaning lady appreciates fine violins. Shouldn't we let her try one?" Lily looked uncomfortable. "Professor, maybe." "I insist." Professor Harmon thrust the violin toward Elena. "Show us your talent." People were staring now. Some looked embarrassed, others amused. A few students peeked in from a hallway, whispering behind their hands. "Please," Elena said quietly. "I don't play." "One song," Professor Harmon pressed. "Surely our janitorial staff has hidden talents." Laughter rippled through the growing crowd. Professor Harmon stepped closer, his voice low enough that only Elena could hear. "Either play, or I'll tell everyone you were trying to steal it. Your choice." Elena's face burned with humiliation. Her hands trembled as she finally took the violin, knowing she had no choice. "Wonderful," Professor Harmon announced to the onlookers. "Let's all go to the stage. Our cleaning lady is going to perform for us." Elena's heart hammered against her ribs as Professor Harmon led her through the backstage area. People stepped aside, watching curiously as the cleaning lady in her blue uniform clutched the expensive violin. Some looked confused, others amused, a few uncomfortable with the obvious mockery. "Ladies and gentlemen," Professor Harmon announced as he stepped onto the stage, "we have an unexpected addition to our program tonight." His voice boomed through the hall. "Our very own maintenance staff has expressed an interest in fine instruments, so we've decided to give her a chance to perform." The bright lights hit Elena's face as she was guided to center stage. The grand concert hall, which had seemed so beautiful when she cleaned it earlier, now felt like a torture chamber. Hundreds of eyes stared back at her, students, faculty, wealthy donors, all waiting for her to make a fool of herself. Someone snickered in the front row. Another person whispered loudly, "Is this a joke?" Elena stood frozen, the violin hanging awkwardly in her hands. 20 years since she had held such an instrument. 20 years since music had been her life, not something that taunted her from behind practice room doors. "Well, Professor Harmon prompted, making a show of checking his watch. "We're waiting." Elena looked down at the violin. It was far superior to the one she'd owned, a professional instrument worth thousands. Its polished surface reflected the stage lights, gleaming like honey. Suddenly, she remembered her father's words from long ago. "When everything else is taken from you, what remains in your heart can never be stolen." A strange calm began to settle over her. What more could they take? Her pride? They were already mocking her. Her job? Perhaps, but she could find another. Her dignity? No, that they could not take unless she allowed it. With trembling fingers, Elena lifted the violin to her shoulder. It felt both foreign and familiar, like meeting an old friend after many years. She adjusted her posture automatically, muscle memory from countless hours of practice in another life. The bow hovered over the strings. What could she possibly play? Her mind raced through pieces she had once known by heart. Would her fingers remember? Would the music still be there, buried under years of silence? The audience grew restless. Someone coughed. A chair creaked. Elena closed her eyes. She could walk away now, endure the laughter, return to her invisible life. Or she could play, really play, and show them who she truly was. She thought of her father, who had sacrificed everything so she could study music. She thought of her mother, who had worked 3 jobs to keep them fed in those first difficult years in America. She thought of her younger self, who had once dreamed of concert halls like this one. Elena drew a deep breath and placed the bow on the strings. The first note wavered uncertain. Her fingers felt stiff, unpracticed. A few people in the audience exchanged glances, their suspicions confirmed. This was going to be painful to watch. Elena paused, steadied herself, and began again. This time, the opening notes of Mendelssohn's Violin Concerto in E minor filled the hall, the same piece she had seen on the sheet music days before, the same piece she had practiced 1,000 times in her youth. The melody flowed from her fingers as if no time had passed at all. There were technical imperfections, a slight scratch here, a missed note there, but something else was emerging too, something that transcended technique. The raw emotion of 20 years of silence poured into each phrase. Elena kept her eyes closed, losing herself in the music. She didn't see Professor Harmon's smirk fade. She didn't see the whispering stop. She didn't see Lily, the student from backstage, watching with wide eyes and parted lips. All Elena knew was the violin, the bow, and the music flowing between them. For the first time in 20 years, she was not the invisible cleaning woman. She was not the refugee or the struggling immigrant. She was simply Elena, the violinist, finally playing the music that had never stopped echoing in her heart. As Elena continued playing, something magical happened. The initial stiffness in her fingers melted away with each passing moment. Her body remembered what her mind had tried to forget, the precise finger placements, the perfect bow pressure, the supple vibrato that made each note sing. The music flowed through her like a river breaking through a dam. 20 years of buried passion erupted in a performance that grew more confident with every measure. In the audience, confusion rippled across faces. This was not what they had expected. The woman in the janitor's uniform, the woman they had barely noticed mopping floors and emptying trash, was playing like a seasoned professional. Professor Harmon's smile had completely disappeared. He stood at the edge of the stage, his face a mixture of disbelief and growing embarrassment. His cruel joke had backfired spectacularly. As Elena moved into the more challenging sections of the concerto, her technique only improved. Her left hand danced across the fingerboard with increasing speed and accuracy. Her right arm drew the bow with both power and delicacy, creating sounds that ranged from whispers to cries. An older faculty member in the front row leaned forward in his seat, glasses perched on the end of his nose. He had heard some of the world's finest violinists perform this very piece, and while Elena's playing wasn't perfect, there was something about it that commanded attention. A raw emotional truth that technical perfection alone couldn't achieve. Elena still hadn't opened her eyes. The concert hall, the staring audience, Professor Harmon, all of that had disappeared. She was no longer on the Westfield Academy stage, but back in the practice rooms of her youth, back when music was her future, not her past. Her posture had changed too. The slightly hunched shoulders of the unnoticed cleaning woman were gone. Now she stood tall, her chin proudly supporting the violin, her body swaying gently with the music. In the third row, a young violin student nudged her friend. "Who is she really?" she whispered. The friend could only shake her head in wonder. The piece grew more intense, building toward its emotional peak. Elena's fingers flew across the strings, executing difficult runs with a naturalness that comes only from years of dedicated practice. Sweat beaded on her forehead, but she didn't falter. The entire hall had fallen completely silent except for the sound of the violin. No coughing, no program rustling, no whispered comments. Every person sat transfixed by the unexpected gift of this performance. One of the wealthy donors, a woman known for her generous support of the arts, dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. There was something in Elena's playing that touched her deeply, perhaps the contrast between the humble uniform and the soaring music, or perhaps the unmistakable sense that they were witnessing someone reclaiming a long-lost piece of themselves. As Elena approached the final section of the movement, her playing took on new heights of expression. The years of cleaning floors while listening to others practice, the nights spent dreaming of music, the daily struggles of her simple life, all of it poured into the music, giving it a depth that left many listeners with tears in their eyes. Professor Harmon had quietly moved off stage, aware that his attempt to humiliate Elena had transformed into something entirely different. A few audience members noticed his retreat, and their respect for him diminished as their admiration for Elena grew. The final notes of the movement hung in the air, crystal clear and perfectly placed. Elena held the last note, her bow steady and sure, the vibrato in her left hand adding warmth to the sound. Then silence. For 3 heartbeats, no one moved, no one breathed. Elena finally opened her eyes, the spell broken. The reality of what she had just done, and where she was, came flooding back. She lowered the violin slowly, her hands trembling not from nervousness now, but from the emotional release of playing again after so many years of silence. She looked out at the audience, bracing herself for their reaction. For one terrible moment, Elena thought she had imagined it all. The silence stretched on as hundreds of eyes stared at her. She stood alone on the vast stage, still holding the violin, suddenly aware again of her cleaning uniform, her worn shoes, her place in this world. Had she played as well as she thought? Or had 20 years of rust made her performance embarrassing after all? Then it happened. One person in the back stood up and began to clap, then another, and another. Within seconds, the entire audience rose to their feet in a thunderous standing ovation that seemed to shake the very walls of the concert hall. "Bravo!" someone shouted. "Encore!" called another voice. The applause continued, growing louder rather than softer. People who had never noticed Elena before were now looking directly at her, their faces filled with wonder and appreciation. Students who had walked past her in hallways without a glance were now cheering wildly. Elena felt tears welling up in her eyes. She hadn't cried in years, not when she was overlooked for a promotion at work, not when she couldn't afford to fix her car, not even when she realized she'd never play professionally. But now, tears streamed freely down her face. The student violinist, Lily, appeared at the edge of the stage, her eyes wide with admiration. "That was incredible," she said, loud enough for Elena to hear over the applause. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Before Elena could answer, an older woman pushed her way to the front. She was elegantly dressed and moved with authority, the head of the string department, Professor Chen, whom Elena had only seen from a distance before. "My dear," Professor Chen said, climbing the steps to the stage, "that was extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary." The applause continued unabated. Someone in the audience was filming with their phone. Several faculty members were discussing something animatedly, gesturing toward Elena. "I don't understand," Elena said quietly to Professor Chen, her voice shaking. "Why are they clapping like this?" The older woman looked at her with kind but puzzled eyes. "Because you just gave one of the most moving performances of Mendelssohn I've heard in this hall. Where have you been hiding?" Elena gestured helplessly at her uniform. "Cleaning. I've been cleaning." "Not anymore," Professor Chen said firmly, taking Elena's free hand. "Not if I have anything to say about it." The applause finally began to die down as the dean of the music school made his way to the stage. He was a tall, dignified man whom Elena had seen many times, but who had never once noticed her. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced into the microphone, "I believe we have all witnessed something remarkable tonight. He turned to Elena. Would you favor us with your name, please? Elena stepped forward hesitantly. Elena Marino, she said softly into the microphone. Elena Marino, the dean repeated, and the audience applauded again. Ms. Marino, where did you receive your training? She swallowed hard. The National Conservatory before. She trailed off, not wanting to explain her whole history on stage. Well, Ms. Marino, the dean continued, I think I speak for everyone here when I say we would love to hear more from you. Perhaps the entire concerto. The audience cheered in agreement. Elena looked out at the sea of faces, all focused on her, all waiting expectantly. She saw Professor Harmon at the back of the hall, his face unreadable. She saw the young students looking at her with new eyes. She saw Professor Chen nodding encouragement. For 20 years, Elena had been invisible. Now suddenly, everyone could see her. She raised the violin again, settling it under her chin with newfound confidence. This time, there was no hesitation. Her bow touched the strings, and she began to play from the beginning, but with even greater assurance and freedom. As the music filled the hall once more, Elena felt something shift inside her, a wall crumbling, a door opening. The person she had once been and the person she had become were no longer separate. Through music, she was whole again. And as she played, a young student in the audience pulled out his phone and pressed record, not knowing that this video would change Elena's life forever. For one terrible moment, Elena thought she had imagined it all. The silence stretched on as hundreds of eyes stared at her. She stood alone on the vast stage, still holding the violin, suddenly aware again of her cleaning uniform, her worn shoes, her place in this world. Had she played as well as she thought? Or had 20 years of rust made her performance embarrassing after all? Then it happened. One person in the back stood up and began to clap, then another, and another. Within seconds, the entire audience rose to their feet in a thunderous standing ovation that seemed to shake the very walls of the concert hall. "Bravo!" someone shouted. "Encore!" called another voice. The applause continued, growing louder rather than softer. People who had never noticed Elena before were now looking directly at her, their faces filled with wonder and appreciation. Students who had walked past her in hallways without a glance were now cheering wildly. Elena felt tears welling up in her eyes. She hadn't cried in years, not when she was overlooked for a promotion at work, not when she couldn't afford to fix her car, not even when she realized she'd never play professionally. But now, tears streamed freely down her face. The student violinist, Lily, appeared at the edge of the stage, her eyes wide with admiration. "That was incredible," she said, loud enough for Elena to hear over the applause. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Before Elena could answer, an older woman pushed her way to the front. She was elegantly dressed and moved with authority, the head of the string department, Professor Chen, whom Elena had only seen from a distance before. "My dear," Professor Chen said, climbing the steps to the stage, "that was extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary." The applause continued unabated. Someone in the audience was filming with their phone. Several faculty members were discussing something animatedly, gesturing toward Elena. "I don't understand," Elena said quietly to Professor Chen, her voice shaking. "Why are they clapping like this?" The older woman looked at her with kind but puzzled eyes. "Because you just gave one of the most moving performances of Mendelssohn I've heard in this hall. Where have you been hiding?" Elena gestured helplessly at her uniform. "Cleaning. I've been cleaning." "Not anymore," Professor Chen said firmly, taking Elena's free hand. "Not if I have anything to say about it." The applause finally began to die down as the dean of the music school made his way to the stage. He was a tall, dignified man whom Elena had seen many times, but who had never once noticed her. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced into the microphone, "I believe we have all witnessed something remarkable tonight." He turned to Elena. "Would you favor us with your name, please?" Elena stepped forward hesitantly. "Elena Marino," she said softly into the microphone. "Elena Marino," the dean repeated, and the audience applauded again. "Ms. Marino, where did you receive your training?" She swallowed hard. "The National Conservatory before." She trailed off, not wanting to explain her whole history on stage. "Well, Ms. Marino," the dean continued, "I think I speak for everyone here when I say we would love to hear more from you. Perhaps the entire concerto." The audience cheered in agreement. Elena looked out at the sea of faces, all focused on her, all waiting expectantly. She saw Professor Harmon at the back of the hall, his face unreadable. She saw the young students looking at her with new eyes. She saw Professor Chen nodding encouragement. For 20 years, Elena had been invisible. Now suddenly, everyone could see her. She raised the violin again, settling it under her chin with newfound confidence. This time, there was no hesitation. Her bow touched the strings, and she began to play from the beginning, but with even greater assurance and freedom. As the music filled the hall once more, Elena felt something shift inside her, a wall crumbling, a door opening. The person she had once been and the person she had become were no longer separate. Through music, she was whole again. And as she played, a young student in the audience pulled out his phone and pressed record, not knowing that this video would change Elena's life forever. Elena woke up the next morning feeling as if she had dreamed the whole thing. But the soreness in her shoulder and the slight tenderness of her fingertips told her it had been real. She had played again, really played. She made coffee and checked her phone, something she rarely did first thing in the morning. To her surprise, she had 17 missed calls and over 30 text messages, mostly from numbers she didn't recognize. One text caught her eye. It was from Lily, the student violinist. "Have you seen it? You're everywhere." Confused, Elena clicked the link Lily had sent. It led to a video titled "Janitor Shocks Music Academy with Incredible Violin Performance." The view count was already over 300,000. Elena sat down hard on her kitchen chair. The video showed her entire performance, from her nervous beginning to the standing ovation. The comments section overflowed with reactions. "Who is this woman? She plays with her soul." "This is why you should never judge people by their job." "I'm crying." The way everyone underestimated her. Her phone rang again. This time, Elena answered. "Ms. Moreno, this is Paula Wilson from Channel 8 News. We'd love to interview you about your viral performance." Elena barely had time to process this before another call came in, the Dean of Westfield, offering her a scholarship to complete her music education. Then a local orchestra director called about an audition. By noon, Elena's simple life had been completely upended. Reporters gathered outside her apartment building. Her supervisor called to ask if she was still coming to work and to request an autograph. Elena felt overwhelmed. For 20 years, she had lived quietly, invisibly. Now everyone wanted something from her. Everyone wanted to know her story. She slipped out her back door and walked to the small park nearby. On a bench beneath an old oak tree, she tried to make sense of it all. Was this really happening? Could she actually return to music after all these years? "There you are." Elena looked up to see Professor Chen approaching her bench. "May I?" the professor asked, gesturing to the empty space beside Elena. Elena nodded, and the older woman sat down. "Quite a day you're having," Professor Chen said with a gentle smile. "I don't know what to do," Elena admitted. "Everyone wants something. Interviews, performances, my life story." Professor Chen nodded. "Fame, even sudden internet fame, can be overwhelming. But Elena, do you know what I saw last night? I saw a true musician who had been separated from her art. That's the real story here." They sat quietly for a moment, watching children play on the swings nearby. "What do you want, Elena?" Professor Chen finally asked. "Not what the reporters want, not what the viewers want. What do you want?" The question struck Elena deeply. For so long, she had pushed aside her own wants, focusing only on survival and practicality. "I want to play again," she said softly, "not for fame or money, just to play." Professor Chen smiled. "Then start there." Over the next few weeks, Elena's life transformed in ways she could never have imagined. She accepted the scholarship but continued her janitorial work through the semester, though now students stopped to talk with her, ask questions about violin technique, or simply say hello. The viral video led to opportunities, but Elena chose carefully. She declined most interview requests but agreed to play at a benefit concert for music education in public schools. She began teaching weekend violin classes for neighborhood children who couldn't afford private lessons. 3 months after her performance, Elena walked into Westfield Academy not with a mop and bucket, but with her own violin case, her old instrument lovingly restored with help from the school's instrument repair department. As she passed the main concert hall, she noticed a new poster on the wall advertising the upcoming student showcase. At the bottom was a small note, "Special Faculty Performance by Elena Moreno." Elena smiled to herself. Her fingers no longer ached when she played. Her confidence grew with each passing day. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. She had years of practice to catch up on, techniques to relearn, repertoire to rebuild. But for the first time in 20 years, she was walking the path she was meant to follow. The simple woman who had been forced to play violin to be mocked had found her voice again, and this time she wouldn't let it be silenced.